Joining me today is Bryan Sears, a veteran State House reporter who has now switched to Patch.com after years with Patuxent Publishing. Thanks for being here, Bryan.
Thank you, Len.
Tell us a little bit about Patch.
Now, Patch is a hyperlocal news site. Hyperlocal is sort of the fancy journalism 2.0 way of saying community journalism. As a former Patuxent Publishing employee, I mean, you're familiar with what Patuxent does. It's in your community. Patch is an online model. There's no physical publication, but we're a daily in communities in Baltimore County and around the state of Maryland and in 760 communities across the country doing journalism every day.
Kind of without planning, we have two online-only website reporters, experienced people who are no longer in print as print fades away, and we're going to talk about the budget. In the past week, we've spent a lot of time digesting the budget. Matter of fact, I brought the 5 volumes of the budget here. We get about 3,000 pages. It's a lot to digest, and you can get indigestion doing it. Tell us some things that we didn't know about the budget when the governor rolled it out last week.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's most interesting to me, and I had some time during the budget briefing to talk a little bit to the governor about it, which is the $1.4 billion in capital bonds that are being put into the budget. Over the last few years, there's been more of a reliance on bonds. This is essentially the credit card for the state. There's been the debt service has been going up. That means that we are paying more to the people who give us money in return for these bonds every year. Things like program Open Space, which was funded primarily through cash through transfers from state taxes that are assessed when people buy their houses, are being pulled into the general fund and being replaced by capital bond dollars.
And this is nothing new, right? I mean,
This part is nothing new, although I spoke with Comptroller Francho a couple of days ago, and the Comptroller pointed out to me that he's become concerned because the state is pulling more money out of agencies and replacing those operating funds and these surplus funds with bond dollars. As this number goes up, the state is creeping closer to its debt level, its cap level, spending affordability.
Float less debt this year than we did last year, right?
Theoretically, but it's still, there's a lot of things that it doesn't take into it. There are bonds that are going to get floated that aren't counted into this $1.4 billion that goes towards the spending affordability cap. Right now, the state is sitting at about 7.1%. Their cap is 8%, and that's indexed against personal income tax. This starts to become a concern as you float more bonds, and if you're putting them in towards ongoing expenses, at some point it makes it more difficult for you to pay these off. And it's a situation you're seeing. California's got issues. The state of Indiana's got issues. Illinois's got issues. This has been covered in a 60 Minutes report. There's a growing concern about these things.
Illinois actually in the past year has floated $3 billion worth of bonds to put into its pension system,
right? Which
at least we're not doing. The governor's proposed pension changes, that's going to save some money, but apparently the legislature's analysis now says, well, those savings are going to go into the budget, and he's not actually going to put as much money as he probably should in the coming year's budget. And there are other things that have been dribbling out.
Right, and one of the other things that something actually just came to me today was there's been a lot of talk about the effect on local jurisdiction and state aid to local jurisdictions. And for example, I cover Baltimore County, and it's of primary interest to me. Baltimore County in the budget volumes looks like it's nearly flat funded. They come out about 1.4% higher in state aid than they had budgeted last year. That number actually, though, is when you adjust it for some of the transfers that they're taking out, they're requiring the counties now to pay for the assessment offices.
Right.
When you take that out, that growth actually drops to almost 0.5%. So the figures that are in the budget book that show some of the counties growing are not don't fully take into account some of these other shifts in costs.
And we've now started the process where the budget subcommittees, which people don't largely cover, are examining the process and some of the things that that we found this week. For instance, the temporary cash assistance, the basically temporary welfare for people in need. They've improved the processing of the claims, but they're running out of money because Congress has withheld it. We've also found a little thing about the new fees, penalties for bad drivers.
Right.
And also the legislative analysts are recommending the doubling of the cost of birth certificates and death certificates. And there's all kinds of little stuff like that that will slowly dribble out in the budget.
Right, and we have to remember, I mean, between legislators and reporters, you have a lot of people combing through, I think what we determined, 3,000 pages worth of budget. We've had this budget less than 7 days. So I think that there's still a lot more that's going to come out of this that we don't know between now and April 4th when they have to pass the budget.
Yeah, for instance, I just had a conversation with an ACLU lobbyist who was trying to say, we were talking about education funding, and I said, well, it's basically level funding. And she said, well, it's level funding in the gross amount, but there are 4,000 more students, so it's actually less per student that the state will be given, and all kinds of things like that.
And if you look at it, it's level funding in the gross amount, but if you look at the breakdowns jurisdiction by jurisdiction, you'll find that some counties do better than others.
And with Annapolis Week, we're also going to try to look at the week ahead. There's certainly hearings, a lot more hearings, a lot more bills in, but the governor's going to have his State of the State on Thursday. What possibly more? I mean, we've had his inauguration, we've had his budget rollout, we've had his legislative agenda. Is there going to be anything new in the?
I don't think so, Len. I mean, these, the State of the State and the inauguration address, I mean, they really tend to be discussions about the governor's priorities and the successes that they're having, and showing that the governor's agenda any governor's agenda is having an effect and moving Maryland in the direction that any particular administration wants to see the state move in. So I would expect that you'll see more of that. You'll probably see, the governor talk about the difficult times ahead, asking for both sides to work together. Again, all of these things we've heard in the last 4 years, and even the 4 years previous when Governor Ehrlich was here. So I don't really expect that we'll see anything new.
And maybe we'll have another press room pool about how many times the governor uses the word forward in his State of the Union address. Well, thanks for joining us for Annapolis Week on MarylandReporter.com.